Good morning, everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to class again. It's Wednesday, February 24th. We are less than 2 weeks away from fall break, spring break. I guess everybody's excited about that. Does anyone have good plans for spring break? Anybody? Anybody? Good morning. Good morning to all. Assalamu alaikum to my Arabic friends who are here today. Good to see you as well. Hope everybody's doing fine. So what you got going on for spring break? Tell me something fun. Tell me something fun. Spring break is after the exam next week. So next week is week 8. We have an exam, and then you have an entire week off with no class. No class. That's week 9 is spring break week. Nice. We have Kira going to Florida. Omar obviously doesn't have any plans going on because he didn't know spring break was here. Got to find something fun to do, Omar. At least don't do any schoolwork, right? Save yourself a little bit of trouble there. I'm going to be laying in bed recovering because therapy will finally be over. All my treatments will be over on the Monday of spring break, and so I have 7 days. I'm just going to lie in bed and try to start feeling better. And hopefully when we come back for week 10, I'll be good to go. All right, Sandy, you better find something fun to do. Okay? So, this week is the Chapter 7, the Cognitive Psychology lecture. Remember I told you that the area of specialization for this chapter is cognitive psychology. And people in cognitive psychology study memory, attention, and thinking. And they also study the brain parts that are responsible for memory, attention, and thinking. We're going to focus on the brain parts today, and we're going to talk about memory not so much in what we can do, but in how memory is affected when it's less than perfect. I sent a video around earlier today about 10:15 it's called Picking Cotton. And it was a 60-minute story about the first case in the United States overturned using DNA evidence. And it occurred right here in Greensboro in the late 80s. And a lady's eyewitness testimony about the man who raped her was actually overturned when the DNA evidence proved that it was another person. And so we're going to talk about memory and how it can fail us today. So that's sort of... Whitaker actually watched the video. How many of you watched the video that I sent around? It's a 2-part video, so there was part 1 and part 2, and it did bring in some memory experts to kind of add to the story of what we're doing. And there's actually a website called Project Innocence, which follows all of the people in America who've had their convictions overturned using DNA evidence, and it's over 250 cases. People who've been convicted of murder, rape, and other horrible crimes based on eyewitness testimony. And it's an absolutely interesting video that I hope you do get a chance to watch. It sounds like a bunch of you have watched the video, and that's great. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the different types of memory stores, relate the different types of memories to different parts of the brain, and we're going to talk about memory as being reconstructive. Memory isn't a camera. Memory is sort of something you create every time you go in and access one. Oh, fantastic. Oh, it was for the discussion board. Okay, so I sent it too many times. Sometimes I find a good video, Luke, and that's all I want to do, send it over and over again. But I thought it would be really good for today's lecture. All right, now, is memory one thing or many things? You can think of all memories as being the same thing. We have this one part in our brain which stores all the memories that we have, and all memories are alike. But it turns out that memories are not all alike. In fact, memory is lots of different things. And depending upon what type of memory you're trying to access, it's going to come from a different part of your brain. So remember in chapter 2, we talked about the modularity of brain function. And each part of your brain is a module, a working computer that takes care of its own function. And we have modules for vision, modules for hearing, modules for thinking, modules for moving. We actually have several different modules in our brain that are responsible for memory. And we began to learn this using case studies of brain damage. And these case studies of brain damage began to enlighten people to the fact that there are actually different types of memories processed in different parts of the brain. Now, today's lecture is a little bit short, so I have a video that I'd like for you to take a couple of moments to look at. This video that I'm sending to you is the video about Clive Waring, the man with the 7-second memory. Please watch this video about Clive Waring. I just sent it around, and I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to watch, actually 5 minutes to watch this video. So I'm going to pause the broadcast for 5 minutes. Actually, I'm still going to be here, but I want you to watch this video and then come back and type done when you're finished, okay? Type done in the chat bar to let me know you finished. It should take about 5 minutes. Please watch the video. Okay, fantastic. Looks like some of you are done. Wow, what did you think about Clive Waring's video, huh? Pretty crazy. What did you notice about his memory? What struck you about that video? Could he remember anything or what? He has a journal. Wouldn't that be an awful way to live? He doesn't know how old he is. He doesn't have, he's brain fake. That's funny. That's funny. He doesn't know how old he is. He doesn't know what town he lives in. He doesn't know what year it is. Right, absolutely. Ah, but yet he can still play the piano. Now that's a memory, isn't it? Kind of interesting that you should notice that. He does not remember his past and he does not know about the future. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, case studies of brain damage like Clive Waring's have suggested that there are definitely different types of memory. Yes, and he gets very frustrated, especially when people press him on the fact that he can't remember anything. He gets very, very angry. You notice that book that he writes, there's actually an hour-long documentary on Clive Waring if you want to watch it. I think I've got it in your course resources folder. But he keeps writing. About every 30 minutes he'll write, "I am now alive," because he wakes up and he realizes that he's now alive. Well, in the video, the doctor actually shows him that and says, "Who wrote these lines? And didn't you write these?" And he gets very, very angry because it's obvious that he wrote that he was alive, but he doesn't remember. You know the funny thing, Omar? His wife actually divorced him and moved to New York. And he did not know he had been divorced. And she would have called him occasionally on the phone to ask how he was doing. And he would pick up the phone and he would be very happy to talk to her. And she would tell him he was in New York. She was in New York. And he'd say, "Oh, that's great. When are you coming back?" And he would say, "Oh, soon, soon." She would say, "Soon." And after several years, she realized that she could not move on from him. So she moved back to England where he was and married him. And this guy doesn't know that he was divorced or remarried. He does not know that. Can you imagine? He doesn't know that he's been married or divorced. But she's probably the only thing he can remember. He can't remember his kids either. And you know what? It's really weird. He remembers license plates from when he was a boy. He remembers all of his family's license plates. So he's got these very weird sort of pockets of memory, right? Now, here's the deal. Your book talks about a very famous patient called H.M., Henry Molaison, and he was back in the 60s. And he had brain surgery because he had terrible seizures. And they removed his hippocampus. And it turned out, now Clive had a fever and it destroyed his hippocampus and his temporal lobes. So he can't remember anything before the accident, and he can't remember anything after the accident. But in Henry Molaison's case, his destruction of the hippocampus demonstrated a very interesting thing about the hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for storing memories. Memories aren't stored there, they just have to process through there on their way to going to the temporal lobes. So your memories are actually stored in your temporal lobes once they're permanent. Your knowledge of who the first president of the United States was, George Washington, is stored in your temporal lobes. If you had your hippocampus removed, like Henry Molaison, you would still be able to remember who George Washington was. What you would have is anterograde amnesia. You wouldn't be able to learn who the next president is. So based on HM, we learned that the hippocampus is responsible for processing memories, though they aren't stored there. And sometimes people have retrograde amnesia. If you have damage to your temporal lobes, you'll have retrograde amnesia. You won't be able to remember what happened before the accident, okay? And if you have damage to your hippocampus, you won't be able to remember information that occurs after the accident, which is called anterograde amnesia. Yes, he could do that before. He had very good memory, and he could remember numbers and stuff like that. And so he had these well-learned memories for license plate in his brain. Apparently, that part of his temporal lobe is not damaged. My voice is becoming a little more and more difficult. I may be able to lecture next week. I may not. I'll tell you that later. But I've got several more treatments this week, and my throat is starting to get bad. So I apologize if I'm drinking water or choking up on my lecture. Okay, so do you understand the difference between retrograde amnesia and anterograde amnesia? Retrograde amnesia means you can't remember anything before the accident, your old memories. Anterograde amnesia means you can't put new memories into your mind. Now, here's the deal. When we talk about these type of memories, we're talking about explicit memories. Now, explicit memories are those memories that you have to call up into conscious awareness. So if I told you that there's an exam next week, your ability to remember that next week would be an explicit memory. Now, you can think of explicit memories as having two types: episodic and semantic memory. Episodic memories are memories for things that actually happened to you. So if you can remember your graduation ceremony from high school, if you can remember the birth of your little brother or little sister, if you can remember let's see, your 8th birthday party, those are episodic memories, okay? Those are personally experienced events. And different from those are explicit memories, things that you have to call up in your brain, like what is a telephone used for, okay? If you get sick, what do you go to? You go to a hospital. That's a semantic memory, a knowledge. If I ask you if a tomato is a fruit or a vegetable, and you can tell me that a tomato is a fruit, that is a semantic memory. So do you see the difference between episodic memory and semantic memories? Now, sometimes people get a bump on their head, and for a couple of days, they'll forget all the things that happened to them in their past. They'll still remember what a phone is, they'll still remember what a tomato was, but they might forget what happened to them in the last couple of days. Sometimes people experience this self-amnesia, if you will. And so we know from these people that you can differentiate memories into episodic memories and semantic memories. Semantic memories are oftentimes stored perfectly. Episodic memories, every time you access an episodic memory, you change it a little bit. So every time you think about high school graduation, you're adding in and removing details from that memory. Every time you think about your 8th birthday party or that person you broke up with in 11th grade and why you broke up with them, every time you access that episodic memory, it actually changes a little bit. How come we forget? Joanne wants to know, how come we forget dreams? That's a great question. The reason that we can't remember dreams is because they are not processed through the hippocampus. They are sensory experiences that are not processed through the hippocampus. So they disappear almost immediately. In fact, your inability to remember a memory is kind of like Clive Waring and H.M.'s inability to remember new memories, because the things that they experience aren't processed through the hippocampus either. So that's a great point to bring up, Joanna. Every time you wake up and you forget a dream, you're having the same experience that Clive Waring and the same experience that Henry Molaison had. Now, we're going to differentiate these explicit memories, which are typically stored in the temporal lobes. We're going to sort of differentiate them from implicit memories. And implicit memories are, what about amnesia after drinking? Wow. You know what? That's a good question, and I'm not sure I could accurately answer that, Kira. But obviously, it probably does something with your hippocampus, is what I'm going to guess. I'll look that up and give you a better answer, Kira. The only way you can remember the dream is if you talk about it right after you wake up. Exactly. The only way you can remember a memory dream is if you talk about it right after you wake up. And do you know why? Because as soon as you wake up and start talking about it, you're now processing it through the hippocampus. Okay? And so if you talk and think about that dream for 5 or 6 minutes after you wake up and give your hippocampus a chance to store that, to consolidate that into your long-term memories, then you can remember the dream. So some of you probably remember dreams that you've had, but those are usually dreams that scared you enough or that you had so frequently that you thought about them for a while after you woke up. That's a really good point. Brain injuries typically affect our explicit memories. Brain injuries typically only affect brain injuries to the temporal lobes and concussions and stuff like that typically only affect our explicit memories, Morgan J. Good question. Very, very good question. We're going to differentiate those from implicit memories. So if I ask each and every one of you to pick up your phone and dial your parent's number, you could do that while you were talking to me. In fact, some of you wash the dishes while you're talking. Some of you ride a bike while you're talking to somebody and not paying attention. Some of you can even log into your email address while talking to another person. That's because implicit memories don't have to be brought into consciousness. I can type a Facebook message without even losing focus of my lecture. And sometimes I'll do that. I'll be down here typing a message while I'm talking to you, and you don't even know it. And it's because my thumbs are sort of have a life of my own. And so we're going to differentiate explicit memories from implicit memories. Now you'll notice Clive Waring couldn't remember anything that happened in the past. He couldn't remember anything that happened in the future. But he was insanely good at playing the piano. If you put him down in front of the piano, he could automatically start playing it. That's because it was motor memory. You folks have heard of, or muscle memory. Any of you folks heard of the term muscle memory? Muscle memory is the layman's term for what we would call a procedural memory. So a cognitive psychologist would call muscle memory a procedural memory. You know how to dial a phone. You know how to walk. You know how to drink. Hey, have any of you ever been driving down the highway and then daydreaming or something, and then all of a sudden you wake up and you go, oh my God, I've been driving a car for 5 minutes. I don't know where I am or how I got here. And yet you managed to drive a car for a couple of minutes without wrecking. How many of you have had that experience before? It's kind of scary, isn't it? That's because your cerebellum is taking control over what we would call your motor memories. No, he did not read the sheet music. He instead was playing that from well-learned muscle memory. Anything you can do well is what we would call a procedural memory. So if any of you out there play guitar, or if you've ever seen somebody playing a guitar really fast and you say, oh my God, how do you remember to move your fingers in all that position? The guitar player will tell you, if you have to think about it, you haven't learned it yet. The drummer, if you have to think about how to hit those drums in the proper order, you haven't learned it yet. So procedural memories are controlled by the cerebellum. So once you learn some bodily function, some bodily memory really, really well, you don't have to think about it anymore. Instead, you just do it because it's learned by your cerebellum. Exactly, Lily, and that's because they're procedural memories. So you sit down in front of that piano, and I'll bet you can probably play Fur Elise. Da 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 da. Right? I'll bet you can play something like that, Lily, and you haven't done it in years. Something that you've learned really well just sort of seems to come back to you, even without your thinking about it. That's what we would call an implicit procedural memory. Now, it turns out that classical conditioning, do you folks remember chapter 5, the dog and the salivation, right? Now, it turns out that classical conditioning is located in the amygdala. Now, they haven't done this in humans because it would be illegal to do. But in monkeys, when you destroy the amygdala, they lose the ability to remember classically conditioned fears. Okay, so classical conditioning being afraid of something, having a fear of heights that you learn through classical conditioning, you don't have to think about that. That just pops up into your heart, so to speak. So classical conditioning and procedural memory are what we would call implicit memories. And implicit memories are different from explicit memories in that explicit memories you have to call up into your conscious awareness, right? Now, we've even learned that there's even a different kind of memory. I would attach it right out to the left of the episodic memory. I would call it your self-memory. Your memory for who you are, how old you are, and what kind of person you are. That's called your self-memory. It turns out that there's a fairly rare kind of amnesia called psychogenic amnesia. Doesn't occur because of brain damage, but it usually occurs because of psychological trauma. And sometimes people will lose their memory for themselves. Now, if you get a bump on your head and you lose your episodic memories for a while, you might forget what you did the last couple of days or where you've been. But you don't, or if you may forget the things that happened to you, but you still remember who you are. But there are some people who go through terrible amounts of stress and they actually forget themselves. And sometimes these people will go on fugue, is what it's called, and they'll actually go get on a bus and move away. And you may say, "Oh my God, my boyfriend just disappeared. Somebody probably killed him." And then 6 months later, your boyfriend, whose name is Eddie, is found up in Tennessee working as a short order cook, and he calls himself Brandon. So sometimes people actually lose their self-memory. Okay? So let's go. There's a chart in your book in this chapter, and I want you to be familiar with these different areas of the brain and what they're responsible for in terms of memory. Now, it turns out people who have damage to their frontal lobes have difficulty paying attention and focusing on tasks. Paying attention and focusing on tasks and doing something that's in front of you is what we call your short-term memory or your working memory. Okay? So damage to your prefrontal cortex makes it hard to focus on one thing and keep some stuff in your mind. That's what we would call your working or short-term memory. Your explicit memory is controlled by your temporal lobes, and that's in terms of your semantic memory or general knowledge, your episodic memory, or your self-knowledge that I told you about. Now, remember, memories are stored there, but they're not processed there. Every time you try to remember something, you are consolidating that memory. That's a term we use to talk about making a memory more permanent in your temporal lobe. You are consolidating it. You are consolidating it. Now, you've fully consolidated George Washington. That's free of your hippocampus. So you can remember George Washington. But if I try to tell you need to remember the next president, it'll have to go through that hippocampus for consolidation. And then your implicit memories are controlled by your amygdala and your cerebellum. I do want you to know these different brain parts and what part of memory they control for the exam. Does everybody understand that? Shall I move on? Now, if you think about it, you might ask yourself, what is the evolutionary value of having a memory? Why did evolution put memories in our brain? Think about that. Why do we have memories? What's the use of memories? Can somebody tell me? What's the survival value of a memory? I'm going to wait for a second to hear if anybody's got an answer for that. Does anybody know why we have memories? What evolutionary value could there be? Adaptation to the environment? Yes. I'll give you a bell for that. Learning? Yes. But why? There you go. Yasmin, we have to remember what is danger and what is not danger. if you think about it, memory isn't about the past, because cave people didn't need to worry about what happened in the past. They just needed to remember, hey, yesterday I ate that red mushroom and it almost killed me, so I don't want to eat a red mushroom again. Hey, last time we were down there by those saber-toothed tigers and one of those saber-toothed tigers ate Fred. Let's stay away from the saber-toothed tigers. So memory is for the future, not the past. So if you think about it, memory doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to keep you from making the same mistake twice. So I don't need to remember the exact shape of that mushroom. I just need to remember the general characteristics of that mushroom. And that's enough to keep me safe. And in fact, if I eat some more mushrooms that are similar but not exactly like that, and they make me really sick, I want to update my memory so my memory is new. And so we keep changing our memories. So your memory isn't a JPEG. It isn't a perfect recollection of the past. It's instead a Wikipedia page that we change each time we access it. So each time I think about mushrooms, I remember them, but I add an information to it. So the weird thing is, every time you consolidate or reconsolidate a memory, every time you consolidate a memory, you are updating that memory and changing it. Now, here's the deal. We unfortunately live in a 21st century world where we are expected to have a perfect memory. So for the test, I don't want you to know part of the memory. I want you to know the memory exactly. I want you to know the book knowledge exactly. I don't want you to be sort of right. I want you to be exactly right. When you go into a court of law and we want you to tell us what happened that day you saw the airplane, you saw the car wreck, I don't want you to be sort of right. I want you to be exactly right. Except our memory isn't created that way. Our memory wasn't created to be perfect. And lots of researchers, including Elizabeth Loftus, who was presented in the video I sent around earlier this morning, has made a career out of demonstrating how memory is imperfect. And for the test, I'd like for you to know that there are sort of 4 different ways in which memories can be altered. All right, I'm going to start with the first one, memory bias. You know what? If you typically change your memories to fit with your current beliefs or attitudes. So I have lots of friends who were moderates, maybe some of them were even Democrats, who voted for Bill Clinton and who voted for Barack Obama, excuse me, Barack Obama, right? And now these people tell me that, and they used to like Obama, and they used to say he was a great president. Now, 5 years later, all they can do is remember how much they hated him and how horrible a president he was. I would argue that what they've done is they've changed their memories to fit with their new political beliefs. And yes, the hippocampus, every time you reconsolidate a memory, it goes through your hippocampus. Yes, it does, Kira. Yes, it does, Kira. Yes, it does. Very good point. And so every time I think about Obama, right, and I've changed my political parties, and I've decided that I love Trump, I listen to my Trump friends, and they tell me things about Obama may be true, may not be true. Every time I think about Obama, I update and reconsolidate this memory, and I change it a little bit. And after a while, I actually change my memories to fit with my now different political party. You know what? Back when I was a junior in high school, I absolutely loved Duke University. And then I applied to Duke University, and I got the small envelope saying, "I'm sorry, we've rejected you from Duke University," and I had to go to Carolina. And suddenly I forgot all the great things I knew about Duke, and I started remembering all the great things I know about Carolina. Yes, it is. Yes, it is possible to retrieve old memories with amnesia if the hippocampus, if just the hippocampus is destroyed. The reason that Clive Waring can't remember anything is because not only was his hippocampus destroyed, but a large part of his temporal lobes were destroyed, because your hippocampus is right there beside your temporal lobes, which of course it should be. And so with his fever, they didn't just destroy his hippocampus, it destroyed a lot of his temporal lobes. But if you're like HM, Henry Molaison, they just removed his hippocampus. He can remember everything that happened before the surgery. He just can't remember anything new. Does that make sense, Kira? Good questions. Very good questions. Very good questions. Now, here's the other thing. It turns out that most of us can't remember anything that happened to us before about 4 years of age. Your hippocampus, you still don't get it. Your hippocampus is like your hippocampus is the filing clerk. Your hippocampus, the memory comes into your filing clerk, and your filing clerk puts it in the file cabinet, which is your temporal lobe. Okay? And so if you don't have a filing clerk to put that memory away, that memory never goes away. That memory never gets saved. Your hippocampus puts new memories in your brain. They aren't stored there. So if you damage the hippocampus, the old memories aren't damaged. They're still there. They're still there. Your ability to put more new memories in the temporal lobe is impaired. And you know what, Kira? If you want, why don't you text me, and after class, maybe we'll get on a phone chat or a video chat, and I'll spend 5 or 10 minutes explaining it to you, okay? I'm sorry, Kira. It's my fault for not explaining it correctly. I'm sure that's the problem, and I'll do a better job, okay? Now, it turns out that most people don't remember anything that happened before the age of 4. But if I ask some of you, you would tell me that you clearly remember something that happened before the age of 4. What's probably happened is somebody told you a funny story about what you did before you were 4, and you probably think that you remember that video, that memory. That's what we call source misattribution. Sometimes, whether or not, for an episodic memory, something that happened to you, you being there is only one part of the memory. So just like I told you, episodic memories can change. Whether or not you were there can also be added in or taken out after the accident. So sometimes people will hear a story, and if they hear it a bunch of times, they will actually begin to think that they were there and they remembered the story. This is what's known as a source misattribution error. So, Omar, your friend may tell you a funny story a bunch of times about when you kids were in 2nd grade, and maybe you weren't exactly there, and you don't remember what Mustafa did, okay? But if your friend Yasmin tells you a bunch of times about that funny time that Mustafa fell down and got red paint all over his hair, if you hear it enough, you may actually steal that memory and think you were there, remembering seeing that. And that's what's known as source misattribution error. Okay? Now, the third way that we can have faulty memories is through suggestibility. Suggestibility. And good lawyers can use this to their benefit. Now, I'm not sure if they talked about it in the... it is weird to think about it, but yeah, we can actually steal somebody's memory. Now, it turns out that if I ask you a memory in a certain way, you will actually remember something differently. So, I don't know if they talked about it in the video I just sent around, the picking cotton video, but it turns out that Elizabeth Loftus did a research study where she asked people to watch a short video of a fender bender. You know what I mean? A fender bender. Just a small collision, not a horrible crash, but just a small fender bender. She sent these people home for 3 days and then brought them back and asked them to tell her about the event. And she asked them about the event in one of 3 ways. She asked 1/3 of the people, did you see broken glass when the cars bumped into one another? She asked another 1/3 of the people, did you see broken glass when the cars collided with one another? And then she asked a 3rd group, Did you see broken glass when the cars smashed into one another? And you know what she found? The people who were asked the question with the word bumped didn't remember seeing smashed glass, didn't remember seeing broken glass as much as the people who'd been asked if there was broken glass when the cars collided with one another. And neither one of those two groups remembered seeing broken glass as much as the group of people who were asked, did you see broken glass when the cars smashed into one another? Can anybody tell me why? Can anybody explain to me why the people who heard the word bumped were less likely to say they remembered seeing glass than the people who saw the word smashed? Can you tell me why? I'm going to wait for a second and see if I get a type. Can anybody tell me why? I'm going to give you about another 2 seconds, and I'm going to go on. They suggested the bumping means less speed. Good job, Kira. I'm going to have to give you some applause on that one. Very, very good. And you know what? Here's the other crazy, crazy thing. I can actually plant false memories in your brain if I want to. This lady, Elizabeth Loftus, sent these people, this lady, Elizabeth Loftus, did this really crazy study called the Lost at the Mall study. And what she did was she brought people into the laboratory, and she did a little research. She talked to their parents, okay, and got 2 memories from their childhood that maybe they did or didn't remember. And she asked them, hey, do you remember at your 8th birthday party when you had a donkey there? And of course they remembered that because that really happened. She then asked them the second memory, hey, do you remember when you were 4 years old and or 5 years old and you went to swimming lessons for the first time? And the person said, oh yeah, I remember that because that really did happen to him. She then said, hey, do you remember when you were 3 years old and you got lost at the mall and your parents lost you and you were alone at the mall for like 10 minutes and a stranger came up and found you and you had to and brought you to your parents? And she found that almost everybody remembered being lost at the mall, even though they had never been lost at the mall before. She actually planted a false memory in their brain and caused people to believe it. And what she did was she gave them one real memory that happened a long time ago, a second real memory that happened a long time ago, and a third memory that didn't happen a long time ago. And because of the first 2, people automatically accepted the third one as being a true memory. And these people would actually bring out detail. Yeah, I remember crying a lot. I remember the stranger was a really nice old man who told me it would be okay. And they added all kind of fake stuff in there, even though they thought they truly remembered that. She even did a study one time where she sent people a letter asking them about their trip to Disney World when they were a kid. She found a bunch of people who'd gone to Disney World. And up in the header of the letter that she sent them, she put a picture of all the Disney characters, and she put Bugs Bunny in the header, along with Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Donald Duck, and Goofy. And she asked people if they remembered seeing Bugs Bunny at Disney World. And a lot of people said, yes, I remember seeing Bugs Bunny at Disney World. Can anybody tell me why these people did not see Bugs Bunny at Disney World? Can anybody tell me? Can anybody tell me? That's a tough one. I'll bet you. Bugs Bunny isn't Disney. Congratulations. Kira, Lily is right. Bugs Bunny is not a Disney character. There is no way you could ever see Bugs Bunny at Disney. But yet she put him in the header up with the other Disney characters, and that caused people to falsely remember that they saw Bugs Bunny. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so the whole point that I wanted you to get from today is that we have different kinds of memory stores in different parts of our brain, and we learn that from cases of brain damage. We have the hippocampus, temporal lobes, the amygdala, and the cerebellum are responsible for different parts of memory, and the frontal lobe responsible for different parts of memory. And I also want you to know that memory isn't perfect. And so when we try to go back and remember things that really happened to us, sometimes we don't always remember, though have perfect memory for these events, because our brain was not designed to create perfect memories. Okay? Does anybody have any questions? All right, I'm going to go ahead and log off. Don't forget to do your discussion board that's due on Thursday. I'll send you a reminder for that. Don't forget to do your homework for Chapter 7, which is due on Friday. I'll send you a reminder for that. And I look forward to seeing you next Monday at 11 a.m. for lecture. If you don't have any questions, so when we access memories, we retrieve them from the temporal lobe. We bring them back through the hippocampus into the frontal lobe where we focus on them. And as we're focusing on them, the frontal lobes and the hippocampus are working together to reconsolidate those memories, where we stick the new or adjusted memory back into our temporal lobe. Yes, very good question. Very, very good question. I'm glad you found it intriguing. Have a great weekend, and I will see you next Monday, okay? Bye-bye.